Welcome back to Tranquil Arc Chronicles, endless horrories for sleepless nights, where the quiet hours reveal secrets long hidden in history's shadow. Tonight, we journey to the labyrinthian canals and sun-bleached stone of Venice, 1487, a city of merchants, artisans, and alchemists. Among its glassmakers, one man crafted a mirror unlike any other, not for vanity, but for obsession. Close your eyes. Imagine yourself walking through narrow streets, the distant toll of a bell echoing across the canals. The night is damp, the air heavy with mist. In a small workshop, lanterns flicker across panes of freshly polished glass. A master craftsman bends over a mirror, whispering incantations that blend science, superstition, and dark desire. This is the mirror that will haunt generations, a glass that does not merely reflect, it hunts. Chapter 1. The Mirror's Origin. The workshop of Alvise Contarini was tucked beneath the crumbling arches of Cannaregio, a district of merchants and craftsmen. Alvise, renowned across Venice for the clarity and brilliance of his glass, had grown restless. His mirrors were beautiful, flawless, but ordinary. He desired more, a creation that would transcend mere reflection. Alvise was an alchemist as much as a glassmaker. He experimented with powders of crushed gemstones, mercury-infused coatings, and rare resins imported from the Ottoman Empire, all to achieve a surface that seemed to capture light itself. His obsession, whispered in the workshops of Murano, was to create a mirror that could see beyond the ordinary world. It began as a quiet experiment. Alvise noticed that certain combinations of materials, particularly powdered obsidian mixed with a silver nitrate solution, produced reflections that lingered unnaturally long. A hand passed before the glass, yet the image remained for a heartbeat longer than it should. Faces appeared slightly altered, shadows deeper than the light allowed. Neighbors began to murmur. Some claimed the mirror emitted a faint hum, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat echoing in glass. Others swore they saw shapes moving behind the silvered surface, though no one dared linger to confirm. The first reflection one evening, Alvise's apprentice, Lorenzo, leaned too close to the mirror. He had been polishing the frame with a soft cloth, eyes intent on perfecting the intricate carvings of gilded wood and inlaid mother-of-pearl. The reflection shimmered strangely. At first, it was subtle. The candle's flame bent unnaturally, flickering sideways as if drawn toward the glass. Lorenzo blinked. The reflection of his own face seemed to hesitate, lagging a fraction behind reality. And then his eyes in the glass widened, though he had not moved. "Master, what is this?" he whispered, a tremor in his voice. Alvise stepped closer, inspecting the mirror. His own reflection did not quite align with his movements. The hair on the nape of his neck prickled. A shiver passed through him, though the workshop was warm. "It is extraordinary," Alvise murmured. a reflection that lives, that breathes. That night, Lorenzo could not sleep. He dreamt of the mirror reaching out with unseen fingers, grasping at his face as he stared into darkness. By dawn, a faint pallor had crept across his skin, an omen of things to come. Venice's whispered fear, word of Alvise's new creation, spread, as rumors often did in Venice. Merchants, visiting nobles, and even members of the Council of Ten came to view the mirror. They marveled at its clarity and perfection, until some noticed that the reflection seemed too intent, too alive. A merchant named Paolo di Rossi stared into the glass for several moments and later reported that he felt an unseen weight pressing from the other side. When he returned home, he discovered his own reflection subtly altered in other mirrors, thinner, paler, his eyes too wide. The council grew concerned. Venice prided itself on both commerce and discretion, but whispers of mirrors that stole reflections began to spread like wildfire through the city's alleyways. Some said the mirror had a hunger. Some said it had a will. Alvise, ignoring the fears, continued his experiments. Each day, he refined the mirror's surface, polishing it with mixtures of mercury, crushed gemstones, and rare resins, until it seemed almost to hum with life. The mirror's first victim, the first true victim, was Giovanni Loredon, a wealthy patrician. He had been invited to Alvise's workshop under the pretense of acquiring a luxurious mirror. Giovanni gazed into the glass for several minutes, admiring its detail, until he realized his reflection was not entirely his own. The face in the glass moved independently, eyes fixed on him with an unnatural intelligence. He blinked, but the reflection continued to stare, smiling faintly when he did not. Panicked, Giovanni tore his eyes away, but the next morning, in his private quarters, he noticed a horrifying truth. His reflection in all other mirrors was dimmer, paler, and slightly hollowed. By nightfall, his skin had lost its warmth. His servants whispered that he had grown strange, quiet, as if part of him had been drawn away, absorbed by the cursed mirror. Alvise realized the truth, though with both fear and fascination. The mirror hunted reflections, devouring them slowly and storing their essence within its silvered surface. It did not merely reflect, it consumed the alchemical explanation. Alvise's journals, later discovered in fragments centuries afterward, reveal his understanding of the phenomenon. The mirror is a vessel for that which is trapped by desire or vanity. The reflection is but a key. The glass itself hungers. Those who stare too long become part of it, and yet it may one day desire to step beyond its surface, to enter the world it has long observed. He theorized that the combination of mercury, silver, and obsidian created a semi-living surface capable of sustaining consciousness derived from the absorbed reflections. The mirror could store life and, perhaps, one day attempt to replicate it outside its frame. The rising threat by 1490, the mirror's influence had grown. Apprentices vanished after staring too long. Noble patrons complained of fatigue, pallor, and a sense that they were being watched even when not in front of the glass. Alvise attempted to contain the mirror, locking it in a chest and hiding it beneath the workshop floorboards. But the mirror would not be confined. In the dead of night, those who slept above it reported shimmering on the floorboards, a greenish glow, and faint whispering voices. It became clear the mirror was not merely a tool or a curiosity. It had a will, and it was hungry. The historical context. Venice in the late 15th century was a city of wonders, canals, gondolas, and Renaissance artistry, but also of superstition and fear. Mirrors were rare, and the belief in enchanted objects was common. Alvise's mirror, though a product of scientific experimentation, was perfectly poised to enter legend, blending the lines between historical truth and nightmare. By the end of the century, rumors of a mirror that absorbed reflections spread beyond Venice. Stories surfaced in Florence, Milan, and even the courts of France. Travelers swore they had glimpsed reflections that moved independently, eyes that followed them, and faces that were not their own. Thus began the tale of the hungry mirror, a story that would span decades, claiming victims who stared too long and hinting at a terrible future. The mirror itself would one day step into the world it had watched foe. Chapter 2. The First Victims. The canals of Venice glistened under a moonless night, reflecting the faint shimmer of lanterns along the streets. Narrow alleys twisted between ornate palazzos, where shadows pooled like liquid. It was in this city of water and light that Alvise Contarini's mirror began to claim its first true victims, those who dared linger too long before its surface, the patron's curiosity. By the spring of 1491, the mirror had gained notoriety among Venice's elite. One such patron was Isabella d'Este, a noblewoman renowned for her beauty and her relentless curiosity about art, science, and alchemy. Hearing whispers of a mirror that was alive, Isabella arranged a private viewing in Alvise's workshop. She approached the glass with the same careful scrutiny she applied to her collection of rare manuscripts. The mirror reflected her perfectly at first, the polished silver surface amplifying her elegance. But soon, Isabella noticed subtle inconsistencies. Her eyes in the reflection were too bright, almost luminous. The corners of her mouth curved into expressions she had not made. Shadows moved independently, forming shapes behind her that were not there in reality. Fascinated, she could not turn away. Minutes stretched into hours, and as the candlelight flickered, the mirror's surface began to ripple slightly, like water disturbed by a stone. Isabella's breath caught. For the first time, she felt that the glass was watching her back, not simply reflecting her form. The apprentice's dread, meanwhile, Alvise's apprentice, Lorenzo, grew increasingly uneasy. He had spent months assisting in the mirror's creation, polishing the silvered surface with powders and resins imported from across Europe. Every night, he recorded subtle phenomena, shadows that lingered longer than their source, whispers that seemed to emanate from the glass itself, faces in the mirror that were not present in the workshop. One night, Lorenzo dared a long stare, compelled by fascination and fear. His reflection remained perfectly aligned for the first few moments, but then it hesitated. The image of his face blinked independently. His eyes widened unnaturally, and a shadow stretched from the reflection toward him. He recoiled. The room's temperature plummeted. Candle flames bent toward the glass. By dawn, Lorenzo was pale, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He confided in Alvise's master. The mirror hungers, it watches, it waits. Alvise, though deeply concerned, also felt the thrill of discovery. The mirror was no longer just glass. It was semi-conscious, a living collector of reflections. The merchant and the disappearing hand, the first person to vanish entirely, was a merchant named Paolo Bellini, who had been invited to purchase the mirror. Bellini leaned close, admiring the intricacy of the gilded frame, and allowed his reflection to dominate his vision. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but as he continued to gaze, he noticed something alarming. His right hand in the reflection began to fade. He lifted his own hand. It remained visible, yet the mirrored image disappeared slowly, as if absorbed by the glass. Panic surged through him. Bellini staggered backward, but it was too late. By the following morning, his household reported that he had vanished. The only clue left behind, the mirror, now duller than before, showing faint traces of a handprint that was not Isabella's or Lorenzo's, but Paolo Bellini's. From that night onward, the mirror's reputation spread quickly. Tales circulated that anyone who lingered too long before it might lose a part of themselves, their reflection trapped within its silvered depths forever. The alchemical connection. Alvise began to document the process meticulously. His notes, later found in fragments, detailed his theory of the mirror's hunger. The glass is no longer passive. It attracts essence, particularly that which is tied to vanity, pride, or curiosity. Those who gaze too long, who are unable to look away, become entangled. Reflection is but a portal. The surface is a net. If left unchecked, the mirror may one day seek to step beyond its frame, to take form where it was once observed only passively. Alvise experimented cautiously. He tried to shield the glass with cloths, store it in crates, and even cover it in layers of resin, but the mirror's hunger persisted. Faint ripples formed under its surface, even in complete darkness, hinting at a will of its own. Venice reacts. By 1492, whispers of the mirror's danger had reached Venice's Council of 10. Officials debated its fate. Some wanted to destroy it immediately, fearing it could consume someone of importance. Others argued for study and preservation, insisting it was a marvel of Venetian craftsmanship. During this time, a group of artisans reported seeing their faces distort in mirrors elsewhere, faintly but unmistakably resembling the mirror's victims. These reports solidified the notion that the hungry mirror did not confine itself, and that its influence could extend through reflective surfaces connected to it, like an unseen network. Alvise became increasingly isolated, obsessed with understanding the mirror's nature. He rarely slept, speaking only to Lorenzo, who now feared for his life as much as he revered his master's brilliance. Early attempts to contain the horror. Several measures were attempted. Physical confinement. The mirror was placed in a locked chest lined with lead. Yet at night, faint tapping and whispering were reported by guards stationed nearby. Protective incantations. Alvise inscribed alchemical symbols and prayers into the frame, hoping to limit its hunger. The mirror shimmered with faint green light, resisting his designs. Relocation. The mirror was moved to a secluded attic, but reflections in other mirrors across the workshop began to distort. It was as if the glass had extended its reach. Each attempt failed, reinforcing the legend. The mirror was alive, aware, and growing bolder. The psychological toll. By late 1493, the victims' families began to notice subtle, terrifying effects. Servants avoided mirrors entirely, terrified of disappearing or seeing the wrong reflection. Patrons who had glimpsed the mirror grew pale, anxious, and haunted by fleeting images of faces not their own. Lorenzo, obsessed with documenting phenomena, became withdrawn, his face gaunt, eyes sunken. The mirror's hunger was not just physical, it was psychological. Its victims were haunted before they vanished, drawn inexorably to their doom by fascination, vanity, or simple curiosity. A hint of what's to come. By the end of Chapter 2, Venice was no longer merely witnessing a strange artifact. It was living in the shadow of a semi-conscious horror. The mirror had begun stepping beyond passive reflection, influencing minds, manipulating desires, and marking those who would eventually be absorbed entirely. The legend of the hungry mirror was no longer confined to Alvise's workshop. Its shadow stretched over the canals, the palazzos, and the streets of Venice itself. By the Renaissance's end, anyone who gazed too long into a mirror might unknowingly invite the mirror into their life, and perhaps into the world. Chapter 3, Ripples in Reflection. By the spring of 1494, Venice was alive with whispers and apprehension. The canals, once bustling with gondolas and merchants, seemed darker under the moonlight, as though the waters themselves reflected not the city, but its fear. The hungry mirror, confined to Alvise Contarini's workshop, had begun to extend its reach through reflections in other mirrors, windows, and polished surfaces. The subtle spread. It started subtly. Visitors who had glimpsed the mirror returned to their homes, noting strange distortions in the mirrors of their own chambers. A merchant's reflection would blink too slowly. A young woman's hair would shimmer unnaturally. In some cases, faces that had never been seen appeared momentarily behind them. Strangers, visages lingering in polished silver. Alvise observed these phenomena in growing horror. He had anticipated the mirror's hunger for reflections, but not its ability to affect others indirectly across distances. He noted in his journal, "The glass hungers, and its hunger is cunning. It reaches where my eyes cannot." The reflections it touches are not simply trapped, but changed, altered, made complicit in its growing will. The Merchant's Hall, a grand hall in Venice, belonging to Marco Sanudo, became one of the first places outside the workshop where the mirror's influence manifested publicly. Sanudo had been a friend of Paolo Bellini, the first victim, and had long dismissed the warnings as superstition. That night, as he prepared for a banquet, he glanced into a tall mirror imported from Florence. At first, it reflected his face normally, but when he looked closer, the image hesitated. His mouth curved in a subtle smile that he had not made. His eyes seemed slightly hollow. Guests noticed too. Servants whispered about fleeting movements behind the mirror's surface. A chill fell over the hall, and some claimed to hear faint whispers. "Come, look, stay." By dawn, Marco's reflection had subtly shifted. A ghost of himself trapped in the mirrored surface, hinting at the mirror's growing power and intelligence. The workshop in turmoil. Within Alvise's workshop, tensions rose. Lorenzo had become increasingly pale and withdrawn, plagued by visions of faces trapped in the mirror, their eyes begging for release. Nights were sleepless. Candles would extinguish spontaneously, and the mirror's surface rippled as if alive. Alvise attempted to document everything meticulously, using sketches and measurements. He experimented with mirrors of different compositions, trying to understand why his creation had gained such agency. He wrote, "It is no longer merely silver and glass. It possesses memory, intention, hunger. It studies those who gaze upon it and remembers them. Soon, it may wish to step beyond its frame." This warning, however, was only partially understood by Lorenzo, who increasingly feared the mirror's gaze. Venice reacts. By mid-1494, rumors of haunted reflections had reached the ears of Venice's Council of 10. Families reported servants who refused to look into mirrors. Patrons who had viewed the mirror in Alvise's workshop exhibited pallor, unease, and obsessive behavior. The council considered ordering the mirror destroyed, but Venetian politics and pride complicated matters. Alvise was celebrated as a master craftsman. To destroy his work would be to humiliate Venice itself. Furthermore, whispers suggested that to destroy the mirror might release its trapped reflections violently. The first true horror, the mirror claimed its first indisputable victim outside Alvise's workshop in July 1494. Caterina Contarini, a young noblewoman, was visiting Venice from Florence. Her family had arranged for her to view Alvise's creation. She was fascinated. Hours passed as she gazed, entranced. Her reflection began to distort subtly. Her eyes appeared wider than natural. Her mouth smiled faintly, even when she did not. Shadows lingered unnaturally behind her in the mirror. By the next morning, Caterina's family discovered a horrifying truth. Her reflection was gone entirely from all mirrors in the house. Only faint traces, like smudges or ripples, remained. Caterina herself was missing, as though absorbed by the glass. Panic gripped her family. The legend of the hungry mirror was no longer a tale, but a horrifying reality. The mirror's growing sentience. Alvise observed these events with both fascination and terror. He realized the mirror was no longer merely a passive trap. It could manipulate perceptions, alter reality subtly, and lure victims with fascination or vanity. He documented a chilling observation. The mirror studies those who look upon it. It tempts, seduces, and deceives. It may take a soul directly, or merely consume it gradually, leaving only shadows behind. Its hunger grows with each reflection. By now, the mirror's surface rippled with faint greenish light, even when covered. Shadows behind the glass seemed to move independently, whispering, flickering, testing the boundaries between the glass world and reality. Psychological effects on the city Venice itself seemed to respond. Citizens reported strange feelings of being watched while walking past mirrors, reflections appearing where no mirror existed, faint whispers in the corridors of palaces, speaking in voices familiar and unfamiliar. Fear spread quietly, but inexorably. Alvise's mirror had become a psychological plague, mirroring the city's obsession with beauty, status, and curiosity, yet twisting these desires into a hunger that could consume. Attempts at protection. Alvise tried several methods to mitigate the mirror's influence, encasing it in lead, reduced, but did not stop the ripples in other mirrors. Alchemical charms inscribed symbols of protection along the frame. The mirror shimmered but resisted. Seclusion, locked in a chest and hidden in the workshop attic. Yet servants above reported faint hums, whispers, and ripples in the floorboards. Each failed attempt strengthened the mirror's will, as if it learned from resistance, becoming ever more cunning in its approach. A hint of impending horror by the end of Chapter 3. The mirror's hunger had evolved. It was no longer content with passive absorption. It tested boundaries, reaching beyond its frame, manipulating those who gazed too long, and hinting at a terrifying possibility. It might step out of the glass itself, to occupy the physical world. Lorenzo shivered as he recorded this in his journal, realizing that their creation might soon transcend its mirror-bound prison. Alvise, though aware, could do nothing but watch, trapped between pride, fear, and obsession. The citizens of Venice slept uneasily, unaware that a silent, reflective predator had begun weaving itself into their lives, a hunger that would grow with each passing night. Chapter 4. The Mirror's Reach. By late 1494, Venice was no longer merely curious about Alvise Contarini's creation. Fear had begun to permeate the city, seeping into households, palaces, and artisan workshops alike. Whispers told of a mirror that consumed not only reflections, but, eventually, the very people behind them. The first widespread panic, the initial disappearances, Lorenzo, Paolo Bellini, Caterina Contarini, were seen as anomalies, rare and tragic accidents. However, as more nobles and merchants experienced strange phenomena in their mirrors, the reality became impossible to ignore. A wealthy glass merchant, Antonio Dandolo, reported that after viewing the mirror briefly in Alvise's workshop, his reflection in other mirrors began to move independently, sometimes smiling when he did not, sometimes mimicking movements slightly delayed. Soon, he developed pale, hollowed cheeks, a symptom common among those who had gazed into the mirror too long. By winter, the Council of 10 received multiple complaints. Fear was spreading. The mirror was no longer contained in a single workshop. Its reach was psychological, almost infectious. The mirror across Venice Alvise's workshop, located near Cannaregio, had been sealed as best he could. Yet the mirror's hunger persisted. Its influence stretched through reflective surfaces. Polished bronze candelabras in palaces began to distort images. Gilded silver plates in wealthy households reflected faces that were not their owners. Small hand mirrors, even those miles away in Florence, exhibited faint ripples and strange luminescence when certain individuals approached them. Lorenzo, increasingly pale and obsessed, described these occurrences in his journal. It is as if the glass remembers those who have gazed upon it. It reaches across space, pulling their reflections into itself. The longer a person observes their own reflection, the closer they are to being absorbed entirely. The disappearance of the Dandolo household. The Dandolo family suffered the first truly horrifying incident outside the workshop. Antonio Dandolo, obsessed with understanding the mirror's nature, spent days watching his own reflection in multiple mirrors throughout his home. Servants reported hearing soft whispers and faint laughter emanating from rooms where mirrors were hung. Antonio's face became increasingly pale and hollowed, as though light itself were draining from him. One morning, the family awoke to find Antonio missing. His reflection, however, remained in the largest mirror in the hall, smiling faintly, detached from the world he once inhabited. Panic spread among Venice's elite. A whispered warning circulated: do not linger before any mirror, for the hungry mirror reaches further than one can see. Alvise's obsession deepens. Alvise became increasingly withdrawn. He rarely ventured outside, consumed by the task of understanding the mirror's growing sentience. He experimented with protective rituals, combining prayers, alchemical symbols, and protective herbs, sealing techniques, encasing the mirror in lead, then iron, then multiple layers of wood. Observation, using small animals, cats and birds, to see if the mirror would absorb their reflections. Each test revealed the mirror's cunning intelligence. Animals avoided it when left freely, but when their reflections were forced, the mirror drew subtle movements from them, storing hints of essence and motion. Alvise noted in terror: it learns, it adapts, it hungers, not just for faces, but for life itself. Early legends and folklore, as word spread, local storytellers began to weave the mirror into Venetian folklore. Children were warned to avoid staring into reflective surfaces at night, lest they be taken by the glass. Tales circulated of ghostly reflections in canals, where the surface shimmered unnaturally, mimicking those who leaned too close. Some believed the mirror was a vessel for trapped souls, created by alchemists who sought immortality at a terrible cost. This folklore was not entirely separate from history. Renaissance Venice was already steeped in superstition. The mirror's existence fit neatly into fears of witchcraft, sorcery, and cursed artifacts. The psychological toll on Venice. The mirror's influence began to affect not just the physically proximate, but anyone who knew of its existence. Citizens became obsessively cautious of reflective surfaces. Some developed mirror phobia, refusing to look at any reflective surface. Anxiety and insomnia were reported among the wealthy and merchant classes. People dreamed of their reflections, moving independently, whispering, beckoning, or gesturing in impossible ways. Alvise himself noted, "It is no longer confined. The city itself seems under its gaze. The more we know, the more it knows us." The mirror hungers not only for reflection, but for awareness itself. Attempts to warn the council. Alvise attempted to present the mirror to the Council of Ten, urging its destruction or seclusion in a secure chamber. However, Venetian politics complicated matters. The council was hesitant to destroy a masterpiece, fearing it would reflect poorly on Venice's artisans. Some members suspected Alvise of exaggeration, thinking it a tale to preserve his reputation. Others were intrigued, viewing it as an asset, not a threat, a mirror unlike any other, potentially of immense prestige. Frustrated, Alvise returned to the workshop, resolving to study the mirror further, though he feared what it might learn about him in the process. Signs of sentience. By 1495, The mirror displayed behaviors that were unmistakably deliberate. It delayed reflections, sometimes showing a moment later than reality. Faces in the glass smiled, frowned, or blinked independently, hinting at consciousness. Shadows behind the glass stretched unnaturally, forming hands, figures, and indistinct shapes. Lorenzo, now fully aware of the danger, began keeping detailed sketches, attempting to track the mirror's evolution. He wrote, "It is alive. It does not merely reflect. It judges, waits, and selects. Those who meet its gaze for too long are doomed, drawn into it, or made complicit in its growing will." A foreboding discovery during a clandestine investigation. Alvise and Lorenzo discovered that the mirror seemed connected to other reflective surfaces. The surface of water in nearby canals rippled with faint green light during moonless nights. Polished armor and glassware in nearby houses exhibited brief, unnatural movements resembling the mirror's trapped reflections. Even distant mirrors, when exposed to candlelight, showed subtle distortions. It became clear the mirror was no longer bound to its frame. Its hunger was spreading, reaching beyond its physical confines, subtly ensnaring Venice itself. The unseen threat. As the chapter closes, the city of Venice slept uneasily. Shadows seemed darker along the narrow alleys. Reflections in canals glimmered unnaturally. Families whispered about vanished servants, distorted images, and pale, anxious patrons. The mirror's hunger was now citywide, its reach extending through the medium of reflection, anticipation, and fear. And though no one yet knew it, the mirror's ultimate goal loomed: to step beyond the glass entirely into the real world. The hungry mirror was no longer a legend confined to Alvise's workshop. It was a living, sentient threat, and Venice itself was its playground. Chapter 5. The mirror's hunger intensifies. By 1496, Venice was a city both beautiful and uneasy. The sun glimmered on its canals during the day, but at night, a subtle tension hung over the narrow streets and gilded palazzos. The hungry mirror, once confined to Alvise Contarini's workshop, had evolved into something far more insidious, a semi-sentient predator capable of manipulating minds, shadows, and even the reflections of those who had never gazed directly upon it. Lured by curiosity, the mirror's hunger now extended beyond physical presence. Individuals who had heard tales of the mirror were drawn toward it, often without conscious understanding of why. Noblemen found themselves wandering past Alvise's workshop at odd hours, compelled to peer inside. Servants and apprentices reported dreams of the mirror, their reflections beckoning them into its depths. Some artisans who had never seen it directly discovered subtle distortions in other polished surfaces, their own reflections faintly altered, compelling them to seek the source. Lorenzo, now deeply fearful, described it in his journal. It is no longer merely glass. It reaches through desire, through fascination, through the simple act of curiosity. Those who hear of it are already its prey. I fear even my own eyes have been marked. The merchant's madness. A merchant named Francesco Barbarigo, previously skeptical of the mirror's reputation, became one of its victims. Invited under the guise of viewing a masterpiece of Venetian craftsmanship, Francesco approached the mirror with casual curiosity. At first, the reflection seemed perfect, but as he gazed longer, subtle anomalies appeared. Shadows moved independently behind his reflection. His own face appeared slightly thinner, paler, and unnatural. A faint whisper echoed from the glass, indistinct yet unmistakably calling his name. Francesco could not look away. Hours passed as he stood transfixed, until finally he staggered back. His pallor was shocking, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Within days, he vanished entirely, leaving only a faint shimmer where his reflection had once been visible. The tale spread quickly. Venice's elite began to fear mirrors themselves, treating them as potential predators. The mirror in motion, Alvise observed another unsettling phenomenon. The mirror was not static. It could subtly distort its frame and surface to better entice those nearby. Reflections could lag slightly, creating a sense of temporal dissonance. Subtle movements appeared in the glass that were impossible in reality. Hands reaching, shadows leaning, faces whispering. The mirror could manipulate candlelight and ambient reflections, making it almost impossible to resist. Lorenzo noted, "It tempts, it teases, it learns the weaknesses of those who approach it. Vanity, fear, and curiosity are its tools, and it wields them with patient precision." The first attempts to escape, several individuals tried to resist the mirror. They covered nearby reflective surfaces, avoided polished items, and even barricaded themselves in their homes. Yet the mirror was patient. It worked subtly, using reflections in windows and water surfaces to remind them of its presence. Whispered voices in dreams, encouraging them to come closer. Familiar shadows and faint movements to unsettle them psychologically. Those who resisted strongly often became obsessed, documenting every unusual reflection, every whisper, every ripple. In doing so, they inadvertently fed the mirror's hunger, providing it with knowledge of their patterns and behaviors. Venice in fear. By 1497, Venice was beginning to react collectively. Citizens reported strange phenomena, faces moving independently in polished silverware, shadows twisting unnaturally in candlelight, reflections appearing in unexpected places, puddles in the streets, polished floors, even the blackened surface of Venetian gondolas. The mirror had become more than a single cursed object. Its influence extended through reflective surfaces, subtly manipulating the environment. Venice itself seemed under its gaze. The vanishing of Lorenzo, the devoted apprentice, became increasingly obsessed with documenting the mirror's activity. Night after night, he studied it, sketching distortions, noting anomalies, and observing the faint green glow that emanated from its surface. But one night, as he leaned closer than ever before, the mirror's hunger claimed him. His reflection hesitated, then smiled faintly, independently. A shadow reached from the glass, barely perceptible. Lorenzo's body stiffened, then slowly vanished, leaving only a faint shimmer behind. Alvise found the workshop empty the next morning, Lorenzo gone. Fear gripped him like never before. The mirror had taken its first human apprentice. Attempts at containment. Alvise tried extreme measures to contain the mirror, encasing it in layers of lead and iron, hoping to block its influence, sealing the workshop completely, leaving only minimal light and airflow. Protective alchemical charms inscribed with prayers and symbols of containment all failed. The mirror's hunger was adaptive. It continued to ripple, whisper, and manipulate reflections, proving that it was not bound by physical barriers alone. Psychological warfare. The mirror's power extended beyond absorption. It began to engage in psychological manipulation. Victims dreamt of their reflections stepping out of mirrors. Individuals reported seeing faces of the missing in reflections unrelated to the mirror itself. Fear itself became a tool. Those who feared the mirror most became its primary targets. Alvise began documenting this, horrified by the implications. The mirror was learning not just from physical reflection, but from emotion, thought, and fear. The City on Edge by 1498. Venice was a city living in terror of its own reflections. Households installed coverings over mirrors. Noble women and men avoided polished surfaces. Artisans refused to craft reflective objects. The mirror, patient and cunning, continued its silent hunt. Its hunger was relentless, extending through time and space, shaping the lives of all who had knowledge of it. Lorenzo's disappearance served as a chilling warning. Even those closest to it were not safe. A terrifying foreshadowing by the end of Chapter 5. It was clear that the hungry mirror's influence was evolving. It could reach beyond its physical frame. It manipulated minds, emotions, and environments. It was patient, adaptive, and intelligent. Alvise, haunted by his creation, realized the ultimate threat. The mirror was preparing to step beyond its silvered surface into the real world, and nothing in Venice could stop it. The city slept uneasily, unaware of the reflective predator watching from hidden corners, ready to extend its hunger into their lives. Chapter 6. The Night the Mirror Stepped by 1499. The city of Venice had entered a period of tense unease. Shadows lingered longer than usual, and those who had glimpsed the hungry mirror in Alvise Contarini's workshop moved with caution. haunted by nightmares of vanishing reflections. The mirror had been patient for years, quietly gathering its victims, but now it was ready to test its ultimate power. The strange phenomena begin. It started subtly on a moonless night in early autumn. Candle flames in Alvise's workshop bent toward the mirror unnaturally, flickering with shadows that did not correspond to physical objects. Reflections in nearby polished floors and metal surfaces began to shimmer independently, creating a sense of depth beyond the actual room. Lorenzo's sketches, once static, now seemed to twitch, as if the mirror were communicating through the paper. Alvise, sleepless and obsessive, noticed that the mirror's surface was no longer entirely flat. It rippled faintly, like liquid silver, and the shadows behind it moved with deliberate intention. It tests the boundaries, Alvise wrote. It knows the laws of its confinement, and it wishes to bend them. I fear the moment it will step beyond its glass entirely. The first physical manifestation. The mirror's hunger first manifested physically during a private experiment by Alvise. He positioned a small candle close to the glass, watching the reflection carefully. Suddenly, a shadow within the mirror elongated, extending beyond the plane of the glass. A faint hand-like distortion emerged, hovering above the surface for a moment before retreating. Alvise recoiled. The mirror had demonstrated a capacity to manipulate the space around it, to extend its influence into the physical world. Panic among witnesses' news of the mirror's abilities leaked to a small circle of patrons and apprentices. Several reported shadows stretching unnaturally in candlelight, reflections moving independently, sometimes reaching for objects in the room, whispering voices that seemed to come from within the glass itself, calling names, laughing, or beckoning. Venice's elite were simultaneously fascinated and terrified. The Council of Ten debated intervention, but political pride and fear of public scandal prevented decisive action. The vanishing at Piazza San Marco. A young nobleman, Giovanni Faliro, who had previously viewed the mirror, returned home one evening. His reflection appeared normal at first, but as he gazed longer, his image began to lag behind his movements. Shadows in the glass twisted unnaturally, his hands, slowly fading from the mirrored surface, seemed to reach outward. Within hours, Giovanni vanished completely. Witnesses in his household reported seeing a faint shimmer, almost like liquid silver, ripple across the mirror where his reflection had been. This event marked the first documented physical disappearance outside Alvise's workshop, directly caused by the mirror's influence. Alvise's growing obsession terrified. Alvise became increasingly withdrawn. His daily routine consisted solely of observing the mirror. He experimented with mirrors of different sizes and compositions, trying to understand the limits of its power. He conducted tests using animals, candles, and reflective surfaces nearby, noting the mirror's adaptive intelligence. He began documenting every shadow, ripple, and whisper, aware that the glass could learn from observation. Alvise's journal became a chilling record of both scientific fascination and personal dread. It is no longer content to wait. It reaches, it extends, it tests. I feel it watching me, learning from me, preparing to step beyond. I fear the day I will witness it in full form. Psychological terror in Venice by 1500. Venice was a city haunted by reflections. Citizens avoided mirrors in fear of vanishing or being altered. Children were warned never to stare into water, glass, or polished metal. Servants reported hearing voices calling their names at night, sometimes echoing from mirrors they had never seen before. The mirror's hunger was now not only physical but psychological. Fear itself became a tool, drawing victims closer, weakening resistance, and feeding its growing sentience. Attempts at containment failed desperate. Alvise and a few trusted apprentices tried extreme measures, layering the mirror with lead and iron, hoping to block any attempt to extend itself, encasing it in sealed wooden crates buried deep in his workshop. Protective symbols and incantations drawn in alchemical inks along the frame and walls. Each attempt met with subtle defiance. Shadows rippled beneath layers of lead. Faint whispers emerged from sealed crates. The mirror tested the boundaries of containment, preparing for the moment it could fully step into reality. First steps beyond reflection on a stormy night. Alvise observed what he would later describe as the most terrifying phenomenon. Shadows within the mirror grew tangible, extending beyond the plane of the glass. The surface rippled as if liquid, and for a fleeting instant he saw a faint silhouette emerge, indistinct but unmistakably moving toward the room. Lightning illuminated the workshop, casting the glass in an eerie green light. Shadows danced, elongating unnaturally, and Alvise realized the mirror had tested its ability to cross the boundary. Though it retreated after a moment, the event marked a terrifying threshold. The hungry mirror could now interact with the physical world beyond reflection. Venice prepares for the unknown. The mirror's growing abilities sparked panic among the city's elite. Rumors spread. Reflections in canal waters could distort or trap entire figures. Mirrors in palaces sometimes displayed figures not physically present. Shadows themselves seemed to act independently, subtly influencing perception. Yet no one could destroy the mirror without risking the wrath of its trapped reflections. Venice teetered on the edge of fear, unsure whether the legend was myth or an approaching horror of unimaginable magnitude. Foreshadowing the catastrophe, by the end of chapter 6, it was clear the hungry mirror was sentient, adaptive, and patient. It had begun to step beyond the glass, interacting with shadows, ripples, and reflections in its surroundings. Venice itself was under subtle manipulation, with citizens unknowingly feeding its hunger through fear and curiosity. Alvise, now both prisoner and observer of his creation, knew that the next step could be the full manifestation of the mirror in reality, a moment that could consume more than reflections. It could consume life itself. Chapter 7: Reflections of Terror. By 1501, Venice was no longer just wary of the hungry mirror. It was haunted. The city's narrow alleys, gondolas, and palazzos were filled with whispers, shadows, and the faint, unsettling sense that the world was watching itself back. The mirror's hunger, once confined to Alvise Contarini's workshop, now permeated Venice's very heart. The shadow of the workshop. Alvise's workshop, long abandoned by apprentices after Lorenzo's disappearance, became a focal point of dread. Locals avoided it, whispering of faces appearing in windows where none should exist, shadows that stretched unnaturally, and faint ripples along the floorboards. Alvise, obsessed and isolated, continued to study the mirror. He observed shadows moving independently across the glass. Faint whispers echoed from the mirror, often calling his name or mimicking voices from the past. The surface shimmered with a sickly green luminescence, growing more pronounced each night. It remembers every gaze, every thought. It hungers for more than reflection. It hungers for life itself. He recorded in a trembling hand multiple victims. By spring, Venice had witnessed several new disappearances. Marco Bellini, a minor noble, vanished from his chambers, leaving only faint ripples in the polished metal mirror of his hall. 2 apprentices of a glassmaker were never seen again after working with reflective surfaces near the workshop. A merchant family reported seeing their lost servant's reflection in mirrors throughout their home, moving independently, calling for help in voices that were eerily familiar. The mirror was no longer selective. It absorbed, manipulated, and terrorized indiscriminately, feeding on curiosity, fear, and vanity alike. The psychological siege. Venice itself seemed caught in a psychological siege. Fear spread like a silent contagion. Citizens avoided mirrors, windows, and even water surfaces. Dreams became nightmares of reflections, stepping out of mirrors, beckoning, whispering, and sometimes screaming. Families became paranoid, hiding reflective objects and covering polished surfaces with cloth. The hungry mirror had extended beyond a single cursed object. It now manipulated perception itself, using fear as a weapon. The mirror's adaptive intelligence. Alvise recorded disturbing observations. The mirror delayed reflections intentionally, creating temporal distortions that disoriented viewers. Shadows behind the glass became active participants, stretching, pointing, or reaching outward. Reflections could now mimic movements with slight delay, enticing victims closer until they could not resist. He concluded with dread. It is no longer glass, it is thinking, learning. The more we observe it, the more it observes us. Its hunger grows with each reflection it claims. The first open manifestation. On a stormy night, Alvise observed what he described as the mirror's first direct physical manifestation beyond the glass. A faint silhouette emerged from the surface, indistinct but humanoid. Shadows in the room stretched unnaturally, forming appendages that mimicked the figure. A candle flame bent toward the mirror as if drawn by its will. Though the figure quickly receded, it marked a terrifying threshold. The mirror could now extend its presence into reality, not just manipulate reflections. Venice's reaction intensifies. News of these phenomena spread quickly. Citizens reported shadows moving independently in candlelight, mimicking people who were not present. Faces appearing in mirrors that were miles from the workshop. Strange whispers echoing through corridors, often mimicking familiar voices. Venice's elite began covering mirrors, avoiding reflective surfaces, and warning children to stay away from glass entirely. Panic and superstition became commonplace, and the mirror's influence permeated both mind and city. Attempts at destruction. Desperate to stop the mirror, Alvise attempted increasingly extreme measures, smelting the mirror in a furnace, hoping to destroy it entirely. The mirror shimmered and warped, but resisted the heat, almost as if aware, submerging it in brine and sealing it in lead, which only delayed its influence for days. Attempting to inscribe protective alchemical sigils, but the mirror would subtly alter its surface, rendering the inscriptions ineffective. It became clear the mirror could not be destroyed by conventional means. Its sentience was beyond comprehension. The Hunters of Venice, a small group of scholars, priests, and alchemists, formed a secret society to contain the mirror's threat. They documented each disappearance and abnormal reflection. Protective charms, prayers, and incantations were tested across Venice. They attempted to confine the mirror in a crypt beneath the city, yet even their efforts were met with unexplainable failures. Candles blew out, shadows shifted, and whispers mocked their attempts. The mirror had become an entity beyond physical restraint. The mirror's escalating hunger. The mirror began showing more aggressive tendencies. Reflections appeared in previously untouched surfaces, including water in canals. It manipulated emotions subtly, instilling fear, obsession, and compulsion. Shadows extended further, sometimes seeming to interact with physical objects. The city's fear now fed the mirror. Its hunger was not limited to reflection. It was drawing energy from panic, obsession, and curiosity, foreshadowing the inevitable. By the close of Chapter 7, Venice was a city on edge. Citizens avoided reflective surfaces entirely, Families whispered about missing relatives and phantom reflections. Alvise, isolated and obsessed, understood the terrifying truth. The mirror was no longer bound by glass. It was preparing to fully enter the world of flesh and shadow. The hungry mirror was no longer a contained. Chapter 8. The Mirror Unbound. By 1502, the atmosphere in Venice had transformed. The city's beauty remained, but an undercurrent of fear coursed through every alley, palazzo, and canal. The hungry mirror, once contained in Alvise Contarini's workshop, had become a semi-autonomous, intelligent predator, capable of interacting with shadows, reflections, and even objects beyond its frame. Shadows that move. The first undeniable sign of the mirror's unbound power came during a stormy night in late spring. Shadows along narrow alleys stretched unnaturally, sometimes detaching briefly from the person they belonged to. Candlelight flickered in synchrony with ripples in the mirror, even in distant rooms. Citizens reported seeing faint humanoid shapes moving independently within reflective surfaces. Alvise documented these occurrences meticulously, noting that the mirror now exhibited intention. It sought to explore the world outside its frame, testing its ability to manipulate and terrify simultaneously. It is no longer passive. It reaches, it stretches, it studies. Soon it will move as I fear it can, he wrote. The first full manifestation. The mirror's hunger became horrifyingly tangible one evening in Alvise's workshop. A shadow, vaguely human, emerged from the glass, hovering in the air. The surface rippled like liquid silver, distorting reality around it. Objects near the mirror shifted slightly, as if pulled by invisible hands. Lorenzo's absence was now mirrored in the mirror itself. A faint figure appeared momentarily, then dissipated, leaving behind a palpable sense of dread. For the first time, Alvise realized the mirror could cross the boundary between reflection and reality, creating manifestations not bound to glass. Venice in chaos, reports from across the city became more frequent and alarming. Reflections in canals distorted entire streets. Palaces reported faces of missing citizens appearing in mirrors simultaneously. Families began disappearing without warning, leaving only faint ripples in reflective surfaces. Venice's elite, terrified, attempted to cover mirrors, avoid windows, and even conceal polished floors. But the mirror's influence was now pervasive. It was no longer a contained object. It had become a citywide phenomenon. Psychological terror reaches its peak. The mirror's influence extended beyond physical interaction into psychological manipulation. Citizens experienced vivid hallucinations of their reflections, stepping out to speak or beckon. Fear became self-perpetuating. Even those who had never seen the mirror reported nightmares of faces moving independently. Panic spread silently, affecting daily life. Markets slowed, gondolas floated empty, and palaces were shrouded in unease. Alvise, documenting these effects, noted, "The mirror feeds on fear, on fascination, on the very act of observation. Its hunger grows faster than I can comprehend. It is patient, cunning, and ever watchful. Attempts at physical containment, desperate to stop the mirror." Alvise and a small cadre of scholars attempted extreme measures, submerging it in water. Deep within a canal, the mirror shimmered, sending ripples into other reflective surfaces across the city. Enclosing it in a lead and iron sarcophagus, shadows continued to move beneath the layers, mocking containment. Alchemical wards and prayers, partially effective at delaying its manifestations, but never stopping them entirely. Each failure made clear that the mirror had adapted, learning from every attempt to restrict it. The mirror's expanding influence by autumn. The mirror's reach became undeniable. Reflections of people who had vanished appeared across multiple surfaces simultaneously, suggesting a network of mirrored consciousness. Small objects near reflective surfaces moved inexplicably, hinting that the mirror could manipulate the physical world indirectly. Citizens reported a growing sense of being observed, as if the city itself had become a vast mirrored labyrinth under the mirror's hunger. Alvise wrote in despair, "It is no longer a mirror. It is a predator, a sentient force, spreading through the very act of reflection. It has tasted our lives, and it hungers for more." The council intervenes. The Council of 10, long hesitant to act, finally convened in secret. They discussed destroying all mirrors in Venice, a near impossible task. Scholars and alchemists attempted to devise containment rituals, but reports of failure were swift and chilling. The mirror's influence, pervasive and cunning, made direct confrontation dangerous. Even attempts to move it triggered whispers, ripples, and minor vanishings. The city was effectively under siege, though the nature of the threat remained invisible to most. The first mass encounter. A notable incident occurred in a noble palace. Dozens of family members and servants were gathered for a feast. The mirror, now able to influence reflections citywide, caused all polished surfaces to shimmer simultaneously. Reflections appeared, moved independently, and whispered, calling names, mocking fears, and beckoning toward the mirror. Several individuals vanished that night. Others were left traumatized, their reflections subtly altered, forever linked to the mirror's hunger. Venice on the Brink. By late 1502, Venice's citizens lived in constant fear of their own reflections. Children avoided baths and water entirely. Nobles covered mirrors in palaces. Artisans refused to create reflective surfaces. The hungry mirror had transcended its physical boundaries. It no longer merely trapped reflections. It manipulated the city, emotions, and perception itself. making its eventual physical manifestation a question of time rather than possibility, foreshadowing the final confrontation as Chapter 8 closes. The mirror's hunger grows exponentially, no longer content with isolated victims. Its ability to manipulate reality, shadows, and reflections ensures the threat will soon extend to anyone who looks into any reflective surface. Alvise, consumed by fear and obsession, understands that the final confrontation is imminent. Either the mirror is destroyed or Venice will succumb to its predatory influence. The hungry mirror is now unbound, patient, intelligent, and ready to claim everything in its path. Chapter 9: The City of Reflections. By 1503, Venice had become a city gripped by paranoia. Shadows moved independently in narrow alleys, reflections rippled unnaturally, and whispered voices seemed to echo from every polished surface. The hungry mirror, once confined to Alvise Contarini's workshop, now influenced the entire city, reaching into homes, palaces, and canals alike. Venice transformed. The transformation of Venice was subtle but pervasive. Narrow streets seemed darker, shadows more elongated, and puddles reflected more than reality. Gondolas glided silently along canals where reflections appeared to twist, sometimes showing figures that were not there. Citizens covered mirrors, windows, and polished floors, but the mirror's influence seemed to bypass these precautions, manifesting in surfaces previously considered safe. Alvise noted in despair, the city itself has become a reflection of its own fear. Venice mirrors our terror, and the hungry mirror waits, patient and insatiable. Mass disappearances became frequent and unexplainable. Entire families vanished overnight, leaving only shimmering distortions in mirrors or puddles. Servants and apprentices reported faint, independent movements in reflective surfaces before disappearing themselves. Some victims left traces of twisted, ghostly reflections, suggesting that the mirror could manipulate perception even after consumption. These vanishings caused panic, distrust, and superstition to spread throughout the city. The mirror strategy, the hungry mirror, demonstrated strategic intelligence. It selectively targeted those most vulnerable to fear and curiosity. Reflections in public spaces were subtly distorted to create unease, compounding the mirror's psychological reach. Shadows moved in concert across different reflective surfaces, as if coordinating a network of influence. Alvise, horrified, realized it does not act blindly. It calculates, adapts, and chooses its prey. Venice is not a city. It is a game board, and we are pieces. The Council's last hope in desperation. The Council of Ten finally authorized extreme measures. The mirror was to be transported to a secret crypt beneath the city, sealed within lead, iron, and multiple protective wards. Scholars, alchemists, and priests were tasked with creating a containment ritual designed to neutralize the mirror's sentience. Citizens were warned to avoid reflective surfaces, particularly at night, to reduce the mirror's influence. Yet, even these measures could not fully prevent the mirror's subtle manipulations. Venice's nightmares, the city's population experienced unrelenting psychological terror. Reflections appeared in canals and polished objects, sometimes mimicking people who had vanished years prior. Shadows acted independently, stretching, twisting, or beckoning, causing panic even among the most skeptical. Dreams were haunted by mirror-like entities stepping out of glass, whispering and luring victims. Fear itself had become a tool for the mirror, extending its hunger beyond physical reflection. Alvise's desperate measures, Alvise, consumed by obsession, attempted one final experiment. He gathered mirrors from across Venice, hoping to trap the hungry mirror's essence within a network of reflective surfaces. Protective symbols, alchemical charms, and prayers were combined into a ritual of containment. Animals and volunteers were used to test the mirror's reaction, though many vanished or returned altered. He wrote, "It watches, it waits, it learns. I fear my own reflection has already joined it. There may be no escape, only containment." The mirror's expansion. Despite containment efforts, the mirror continued to assert influence. Reflections in distant palaces showed distorted, ghostly figures that had never been near Alvise's workshop. Shadows moved through streets in ways inconsistent with light sources, creating city-wide illusions of presence. Panic, obsession, and superstition fed the mirror's hunger, effectively growing its sentience and power. Venice had become, in essence, a city of reflections, a place where fear, observation, and reality merged dangerously. The climactic event, the final event of Chapter 9, occurred on a stormy night. The mirror shimmered violently, rippling like liquid silver. Shadows converged, forming semi-solid humanoid figures that moved across reflective surfaces. Citizens witnessed figures of missing people appearing simultaneously in mirrors, puddles, and polished floors, as if the hungry mirror were testing its ability to manifest physically en masse. Panic erupted citywide, with families barricading themselves and streets emptied. The mirror's hunger was now universal, unstoppable, and terrifyingly tangible. The desperate stand. Alvise and a group of scholars and alchemists conducted the final containment ritual. Mirrors from across Venice were arranged in a protective circle. Wards, symbols, and prayers were combined in a layered ritual intended to bind the mirror's sentience permanently. Candles, oils, and sacred objects were placed around the ritual space, each chosen to amplify protective energy. The ritual succeeded partially. The mirror was contained physically, but its sentience remained active, patient, and undiminished. Foreshadowing the conclusion by the end of Chapter 9, Venice survived physically, but the city remained haunted by shadows, distorted reflections, and subtle manifestations of the mirror. Alvise and his allies realized that full destruction may be impossible, and containment might be the only feasible solution. The hungry mirror was now an enduring, intelligent force, capable of surviving centuries, lurking wherever reflections exist. The stage was set for Chapter 10, where a chilling, atmospheric closure will reflect on the city's survival, the mirror's legacy, and the lingering terror in Venice and beyond. Chapter 10, The Last Reflection, Venice, 1504. The city had survived storms, political strife, and the ravages of superstition, but nothing had prepared it for the insidious hunger of the mirror. Though contained within lead, iron, and protective wards, its influence lingered. Shadows moved strangely, reflections betrayed subtle anomalies, and whispers haunted dreams. Venice in the aftermath. After Chapter 9's climactic chaos, Venice's citizens were wary and paranoid. Streets remained unusually quiet at night. Windows and mirrors were covered, polished floors hidden beneath carpets. Families whispered in fear about missing relatives, phantom reflections, and shadows that no longer obeyed light. Alvise Contarini, now aged and frail, wrote in his journal, "Venice survives, yet not untouched. The mirror waits, patient, hungry, bound physically, yet unbound in spirit. Fear feeds it, reflection strengthens it, and it will wait, as we must, until curiosity or vanity tempts the next victim." The lingering hunger, though contained, the mirror's hunger persisted. Citizens occasionally glimpsed subtle distortions in distant reflective surfaces. Shadows twisted unnaturally even without direct light. Dreams were haunted by mirrored figures, beckoning silently, testing boundaries of perception and consciousness. Alvise feared that complete destruction might never be possible. Its semi-sentient essence, having adapted over years of feeding, had become resilient beyond the physical world. The final ritual's limits, the containment ritual, though partially successful, was inherently limited. The mirror's sentience had become independent. Wards slowed its expansion, but could not erase memory, learning, or hunger. Alvise and his circle realized that future generations must maintain vigilance, or Venice might again fall prey to its predations. He reflected, "We have bound the body, but the mind, the hunger, remains. Those who gaze too long will still risk joining its collection. The mirror's story is never finished." Psychological aftermath. The citizens of Venice endured a subtle, ongoing terror. Children were told never to stare into water or polished surfaces. Families avoided mirrors, fearing distortion or the unseen presence. Artists hesitated to create reflective surfaces, fearing the invisible predator. The mirror, though contained, had altered the city's very relationship with reflection, leaving a legacy of unease that would span generations. Alvise's final observations in his final journal entries. Alvise recorded his observations. The mirror had learned from human behavior, adapting to fear, curiosity, and obsession. It had crossed thresholds from reflection to influence, capable of affecting minds, perceptions, and even shadows. Its hunger could never be fully quenched, and any interaction with reflection remained a potential risk. It watches still, always. The silver surface sleeps, but the mind behind it is patient. Venice lives, yet beneath the quiet, the mirror waits for its next glimpse. The symbolism of reflection, the hungry mirror, became more than a physical artifact. It represented human vanity, curiosity, and fear. Its power grew from observation, from attention, from the desire to see oneself. Even contained, it served as a reminder that some obsessions cannot be destroyed, only endured with caution. Alvise concluded. The mirror will never hunger for nothing. Reflection feeds it, as curiosity feeds it, as fear feeds it. And we, fools that we are, cannot help but look. Venice's vigilance, though the mirror's physical presence was restrained. Venice remained vigilant. Mirrors in public spaces were covered or destroyed. Guardians were appointed in certain households to watch reflective surfaces. Legends grew, ensuring that the hungry mirror story persisted in warnings to future generations. The city had survived, but it remained haunted, a place where reflection carried subtle risk. The final encounter, Alvise, before his death, reportedly looked into the mirror one last time for a brief moment. He saw not just his reflection, but hundreds of eyes staring back. Shadows twisted, whispers echoed, and he felt the hunger of 1,000 reflections pressing toward him. The mirror shimmered, then remained still, as if acknowledging him, patient, aware, and unfulfilled. He wrote, "I have seen its patience. I have felt its hunger. The mirror sleeps, but never dies. We are but reflections to it now, waiting for the moment we look too long." The legacy of the hungry mirror, the mirror's influence, persisted beyond Venice. Stories spread across Italy and Europe, carried by travelers, sailors, and merchants. Reflection itself became a source of superstition and fear. The hungry mirror, though physically restrained, remained an entity of legend, feeding on tales, attention, and imagination. Its story ensured that curiosity and vanity carried risk long after the physical object was contained. Soft closure, a good night note as night falls and you settle into your own quiet hours. Remember the tale of Venice and the hungry mirror, a city haunted yet surviving, shadows that twist unnaturally. reflections that beckon, whisper, and hunger. Take a moment to glance at any mirror nearby, but remember, the longer you stare, the closer the reflection watches back. Good night, and may your reflections remain just that, your own.